my name is Landry, and I started a new series on my channel where each and every week I talk all things Best Medicine. If you're not sure what Best Medicine is, it is a new TV show on Fox that is an American spin-off / adaptation of a beloved British TV series called Doc Martin. It was on the air for 18 years, and in 2022 they decided to bring the series to a close. I did not come across Doc Martin until 2024, but when I started watching it, I immediately became in love, and I've since watched the show through 3 times. And when I found out there was going to be an American spin-off called Best Medicine, I was all for it, and since I started watching, I'm becoming a huge fan of Best Medicine as well. So each and every week, I wanted to start a series on my channel where we dig deep into Best Medicine, where I recap the episode, tell my thoughts about the episode, what I would like to happen in the episode, my predictions, and then in a separate segment, I talk all things Doc as a Doc Martin fan, where we compare the 2 episodes, or the 2 series side by side. So if you've not seen Best Medicine yet, you may not want to watch this video until after watching, because I give big spoilers because I dive really deep into each and every episode. If you're curious about my thoughts from previous episodes, because we're already to episode 8 of season 1, I've created a playlist on my channel where I've talked all things from episode 1 to episode 7, and when this is uploaded, I'll add this to the playlist as well. So if you have seen this week's episode of Best Medicine and you're curious what my thoughts are, come on, let's talk about it. Okay, I'm going to say this. I know I say this every week, but this is true. This episode, episode 8 of season 1 of Best Medicine, is my favorite episode. I know I've said that for every week as we've watched, but I'm serious. This episode is my favorite just because who doesn't love a murder mystery? I mean, come on now. This girl right here is a huge true crimer. I love Criminal Minds, NCIS. I love the Lifetime murder mystery movies. I mean, I can't get enough. And it doesn't surprise me that Fox would have a murder mystery episode of Best Medicine. I don't know if they are like a part of the decision making of what episodes need to be about, but it just makes sense because they have 2 shows on as well that I watch. Murder in a Small Town, which is since finale'd, but it's coming back for another season, but I really enjoy that show, and their new show that they've came out with called A Small Town Killer, or Memory of a Killer, and I can't think of the actor's name, but it has, he played on Grey's Anatomy, McDreamy, but he's the main character of this new show, and Memory of a Killer, and I've been enjoying watching that as well, so it doesn't surprise me that they would add a little bit of murder mystery into an episode, being a TV network that has shows like that. So I was hooked in from the start when I was like, murder mystery, what's gonna go happen in Port Wind, because I just didn't know what to expect. This town is a very interesting town. But before I get ahead of myself and want to dig into this episode, because I have a lot to talk about, I'm very excited, I think we need to do a brief recap of episode 7, what happened last week, because, you know, that was a key episode to the season so far. So episode 7 last week was the blood factory. Not very good for Dr. Best. You know, he has this huge blood phobia, can't stand the sight of blood. He either passes out or he gets nauseous. And to have a reenactment of something that he does not like is just not good for him. Even though it's fake blood, he can't tolerate seeing the sight of it. We also, the main thing with that going on is him and Louisa. You know, in episode 6, the end of episode 6 of the Blueberry Festival, Dr. Best, Martin, and Louisa end up kissing. And I was afraid, you know, it might cause tension between the 2 of them, awkwardness, and sure enough it did. They don't really know how to talk to one another. Everything's really awkward. It's kind of affecting their patient and doctor relationship. It's kind of affecting their friendship, and you know, when Louisa ends up fainting, it really causes Martin to have big concern for her, and she just doesn't know how to react to that. She kind of like tries to brush him off, so to speak, and he ends up even getting fired from being her doctor because he makes her upset because he tries to shut down the blood factory with good intentions. I mean, he had good intentions, but you know, he was just being himself, and he ends up getting fired, which does not stop him whatsoever. He is determined to figure out what's wrong with Louisa, and in the end he finds out that he diagnoses her with hemochromatosis, which has to do with something with the blood. And in the end he goes to rescue her from the school reenactment, because he's afraid that she might die from the condition because of shellfish. She was eating shellfish. And he conquers his fear. He goes through the blood factory, but in the end he does end up passing out. But in the town's eyes, he is a hero for saving Louisa. And yes, he becomes her doctor again, which is a happy ending. So we had that going on. It was the big blood phobia. And I think I've covered like the main things that we need to talk about for this episode that would tie into this episode. So, with that being said, let's dig into Season 1, Episode 8 of Best Medicine, titled The Bog Father. So first of all, we see that Dr. Best Martin is being accompanied by his dog, Copernicus. You know, I gotta say it lightly, his dog, because every single time people are around him, he's like, "That's not my dog," which is so funny. And he has something in a paper bag, and immediately I'm like, okay, what's he got? And he tells the dog, Copernicus, it cannot come in. And he closes the door. And I immediately say, wait a second. Is there not a doggy door? Because I remembered in I think it was episode 4, Blaze Day episode. Yeah, it was. Bert and Al installed a doggy door for Copernicus to go in and out of the doc's house as he pleases. And I was like, wait a second, is there not a doggy door? And it happens to be in the back of the house. It's the other door. It's not the main entrance door. So, we find out that what's in the bag is a piece of meat, and it looks like he is trying to kind of face his blood phobia fear. I think that after last week's episode of him, saving Louisa and, like, doing his best to not pass out from the blood, I think he seriously is trying to get his blood phobia under control. I can tell that he wants to get it under control so that he can do more. I think he is embarrassed about his blood phobia. He's tired of hiding it, so he wants to figure out ways to adapt to it himself. So he's trying to cut the meat to see the blood, and it just doesn't go well. I mean, immediately he gets nauseous, and what's he do? It's a doc thing. He goes and hits his head on the cabinet when he's trying to back away, which I immediately laughed. Bless his heart. He's like clumsy. The little things that he does is just, he falls over, knocks things over. It's just, I just laugh. And of course, who comes through the doggy door? Like I thought there was a doggy door. Copernicus the dog. And he immediately takes the meat, and there goes Martin's practice therapy session down the drain. He's not going to be able to practice because Copernicus has now taken his practice meat away from him. So there was that. It was interesting. I was like, okay, he's really thinking about this blood phobia thing now. He is really trying to manage it, and I'm wondering if it's because things with him and Louisa are getting serious, but time will tell. So while he is doing that, we have a major thing going on down at the local bog. I mean, it's Port Wynn. Are you surprised by now? I'm not. We are having our annual Bog Day reenactment. You have Bert, George, and Mark, Sheriff Mark, in the bog doing a reenactment for Bog Day for the local school. It was Louisa and the school kids, so it must have been a little field trip, and they were doing this reenactment, and it sounds like they do this every year. And when it came to Mark's part, I don't know if it was just me, but when he was talking about how he was married, that's where he met his wife, and he was talking about kids and everything, and he kept looking at Louisa. I think Louisa was like, I think they're still trying to work things out after the the engagement break off. I know Louisa broke it off with Mark, but still, I think they still are trying to work things out. It's still a little awkward when it comes to things like that being said out loud. And I could tell that she was like, yeah, I don't know about that. Like, when he was talking, it looked like he was looking at her the whole entire time, and she was just like, I don't know. Can we stop? Let's don't talk about that. When he was like, yeah, I was, and found my wife here, I fell in love, we had kids, and she was just like, no. Which, in the end, the dead body kind of saved that from happening because he kind of slips, and once he pulls up an arm. And that, talk about a nightmare for little kids. I mean, they pull up an arm, and immediately everybody just starts freaking out. And it's like, there's a dead body in the bog in Port Wynne. What's going to happen next? And I was like, okay, here we go. I was very excited. So, I also thought it was funny that after we see that scene, we go immediately back to Dr. Bess Martin's office, and he's seeing all these patients, and it just cracks me up. You know, Irma comes in with something wrong with her elbow or something because of pickleball. Gilbert comes in with a problem, and then I don't know what the other guy's name is. I don't think he said his name, but he comes in with head loss, and each person, Dr. Bess says, well, did you do your physical therapy to Irma? No, I found it boring. Well, did you do this? He asks Gilbert, no. And then he asks the guy with head lice if he got the shampoo, and he's like, no. And it's like, nobody, at that moment, Dr. Best just, like, had it. And he goes in the office, he goes in the waiting room, and he's like, alright, how many of you are here with a medical complaint because you didn't listen to a word I said? And every single hand in that office was raised. And, you know, he had it. He was like, well, y'all need to listen to me. Y'all don't listen to a thing I say. And I just thought that was so funny. And side note, I don't know if you paid attention in the background, but I think Elaine and Al are really getting in a good place in their relationship, because they're just, you know, at her desk kissing. And Al says, I noticed he says to the doc, Elaine had an IT problem and Dr. Best was not having it. He's like, okay, unless it has something to do with a life or death situation, stop talking. Like, he had it. He was mad at the town already, frustrated because nobody listens to what he says, and then they wonder why they're not getting better or whatever it may be. So he just had it, and they were saved by the phone call of him lecturing them because he is called to the crime scene now at the bog. And immediately, you know, Dr. Best is, like, so confused when he gets there. He obviously thinks that something terribly wrong has happened, because the first thing he asks is if Louisa is okay. And, you know, she's like, yeah, we're fine. The only person that's not okay is the dead body in the bog. And, you know, he immediately is being Dr. Best. He's like, okay, why am I here? Because there's nobody living that needs medical attention, because he's so confused. And then it is sprung upon him that Sheriff Mark called their medical examiner, and she's not there, so therefore Dr. Best has been nominated / put in charge of doing the autopsy and identifying this mystery body. And, you know, Dr. Best is being Dr. Best. He's like, nuh-uh, not doing it. I'm a doctor for the living, not a person that performs autopsies. Like, he's like, nope, not doing it. And he couldn't get out of this one because legally he had to do it because he was put in that role. So a lot of things happened in that scene that cracked me up. First of all, the Sheriff Mark, his character, I mean, at first he was annoying to me, but at this point now, I'm getting used to his character, and he just cracks me up. You know, he had all the facts to tell Dr. Best Martin, but the fact when he's like, okay, you're going to need to take DNA samples, you're going to need to do, there was several things, and the key thing he forgets to tell or ask the doc is, where do I need to put the dead body? So he's like, there's something else I need to tell you. Meanwhile, Dr. Bess Martin and Louisa are having a conversation because, you know, his excuse was, I have patients to attend to. I don't have time to deal with a dead body. And Louisa was like, if you're worried about my blood appointment, we can reschedule. And it was like, they're still kind of awkward when they talk to one another, you know, you can tell the tensions are there. And he's like, well, would tomorrow morning be okay? And she's like, fun, that's fun. And then she's like, no, wait, that's fine. And then she gets on the bus, and she has that look on her face like, what did I just say? It kind of reminded me of last week when Dr. Bess Martin was making the phone call to her when she wouldn't answer the phone, and he was trying to leave a message about wanting her to come back in the office so they could see what's wrong, why she has a rash, and he just couldn't find the words. It was just an awkward voicemail, and you could tell at the end of the phone call he's like, what did I just say? Like that was how I interpreted that conversation exchange when she got on the bus. She's like, what did I just do? What did I just say? That is not what I meant. So finally, in the end, it turns out that the dead body is in Bert's van, and they were going to take it to the doctor's office, which Dr. Best says, nope. My favorite line he says is, unless he has an appointment, he's not coming in. In other words, you're not bringing no dead body into my office because that's a no-no. But in the end, it was for a logical reason. They couldn't bring it to the doctor's office because they didn't have a place to store it, because it wasn't cold enough. And Sheriff Mark's like, well, we can crank the AC up, and he's like, no, we're not doing that. So then they're like, okay, then you it's up to you. Where do you think the best place to put it? And immediately when they said that, I was like, oh no, I know where this is going. And I was like, please, please, please tell me this is not what's going to happen. And it happens. Where do they put the dead body? They store the dead body in the freezer of the Salty Breeze. Like, oh my word. I was like, no, they're not doing that. No, they're not doing that. And I'm like, and it was Martin's idea, Dr. Best's idea. I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, and I was with Greg on this one when Greg was like, oh, okay, so we get shut down by the health department because we had an innocent little pig brisket in the kitchen. But when it comes to a dead body in the freezer, everything's okay. And George is like, now, Greg, let's bring a proper Portwin attitude. He deserves a proper Portwin visit, meaning the dead body. And I'm like, just shaking my head. I'm like, I'm with Greg on this one. Like, he gets them shut down because there was a pig in the kitchen, but it's okay to have a dead body in the freezer. Like, come on now, guys. Are you kidding me? And I was like, I was with Greg on this one. And then George. And Martin's no snitch. At least not this time, meaning he better not go blabbing off to the health inspectors that there was one in the freezer, which I was like, yeah, this is like, I can't believe Martin had the idea to do this. But I guess because it was urgent and they needed to figure out what's going on, it all makes sense. So they get the dead body into the freezer, and immediately Bert's like, it looks like a haunted potato. And the doc's like, well, be sure to add that to the autopsy report. And when I was just like, that's just so funny. I just love the little lines. And you have, it was George, Bert, Mark, Sheriff Mark, and Dr. Bess Martin in the freezer. And immediately they're like, okay, what happened to him? And then it turns serious because they find a bullet hole in the chest. And it immediately becomes a active investigation. And, Dr. Best is like, okay, nobody comes in and out of here except myself and Sheriff Mark. And everybody's like, wait, what's going on? And he's like, it's an active investigation. Somebody got killed, and we got to figure out who the murderer is. And, Sheriff Mark is getting very excited because it sounds like he's never had a big serious case before. So, he's all on it. He's like, I want to find out what's going on. So he immediately jumps to it. And then that's when we come to the neighborhood meeting. So Sheriff Mark called the town, into a meeting. And the fact that when he starts talking and the microphone has a voice changer sound on it just cracks me up. I'm like, this can't get any better. I mean, his character already, and add that on top of this, I mean, you can't take the guy seriously. I mean, he just cracks me up. I was laughing. So he gets the microphone changed back to the normal sound, and he immediately starts talking about that there has been a murder at the bog. And immediately the town gets in panic and they want to ask questions. And it was funny. In real life, I think this right here is accurate. So they want to start asking questions, and he's like trying to answer their questions, and they want to know if there's been any leads. And I'm like, they just found the body. It don't work like that. You don't just instantly start getting answers. They have to start investigating. And then they're hiding something. And I'm like, they're not hiding anything. They just now started the investigation. And I just thought that was so funny. The way the townspeople were acting. And then somebody asked something else. I can't remember what the question was, but Mark's like, I've been thinking about that very thoroughly. He's like, okay, I'm handing the mic off to Dr. Best. And it's like, Martin's like, I didn't think Martin wanted to talk on the microphone, but he does. And what does he say? He gave advice, alright. It cracked me up. He's like, do you want to stay alive? Everybody's shaking. Then you need to do your exercises, therapy, telling Irma. You need to take your insulin, telling the guy that has diabetes problems. And all of you need to eat your fiber. I just rolled. I was like, that is too funny. He's had it with these people, not listening to his advice, so he's just gonna give it to them, since he has the floor. And I was just laughing. I was like, yep, that's Dr. Best right there. And then, of course, the whole thing about the meeting was that they were gonna order a neighborhood watch, and they had put Aunt Sarah in charge of the neighborhood watch, which I think is a good, person to put in charge. Aunt Sarah seems like somebody that will do a good job. Time will tell. So while all that is going on, we see that everybody is invested with this murder mystery. They want to know who the Bogman is. The Bogman. They want to know who did it. And then Elaine even asks the doc who this guy is. The doc being the doc, he's like, well, I don't know. I'm getting ready to perform the autopsy now. And Elaine immediately comes up with this idea of, this is like a detective show. And I was like, right away, I knew what was coming. I was like, uh-oh. Elaine's going to be doing something again with her podcast. I mean, do you blame her in this situation? She's as invested as everybody else in this town is. But I was like, I wonder what she has up her sleeve. So all that is going on. We see that Dr. Best, Martin, and Sheriff Mark are getting ready to perform the autopsy of the Bogman. And right away, I could see a personality change for Martin, Dr. Best. I think he thoroughly enjoyed doing this autopsy. Because, he talks about how he loved being a heart surgeon, but he had to leave it because of the blood situation. So with the being able to do this autopsy without having to deal with blood whatsoever, I could tell there was a mood change for him. Like, he seemed more happier. He seemed like he was enjoying himself. And I was like, this is what he misses. I think this is truly why he is kind of in the mood he's in, like the way he acts towards people, is he thoroughly misses doing surgery. So he's doing the autopsy, and you have Sheriff Mark and well, why aren't there blood? Why isn't there blood? And wouldn't it be cooler if there was blood? Like, all he was doing is bringing up blood. Dr. Best is just as cool as a cucumber, and he's just performing the autopsy. And he's like, well, it's been in the bog, so because it's been in the bog, that means that there will not be any blood, and the body's been here for a while. And he's just like giving facts, and it didn't cause him panic or anything with the word blood being brought up, because he was just so calm and collected, enjoying doing this autopsy. So while he's doing the autopsy, we have Sheriff Mark writing down details. He's trying to determine when it was in the bog, and all of these questions you would ask as an investigator. And when it comes to it has orange hair, he immediately oh, no, it couldn't. Well, it could be. And he immediately storms out, and he's like, well, Doc, I gotta go investigate something. I'll see you later. And, the doc could care less. He's like, okay, I'm almost done here. And he's just having the time of his life. He's enjoying this. He's enjoying doing this autopsy. I think it brings back memories of being a surgeon. So while he is there doing that, we get to see the neighborhood watch. And this neighborhood watch cracked me up. I mean, you have Aunt Sarah, you have Greg, you have George, and you have Irma. And what cracks me up about this neighborhood watch is the things that they had. Now, Greg had a shovel. I remember that. Aunt Sarah had, I think she had a flashlight and binoculars, so nothing too crazy for her. Irma had a pickleball paddle, which was funny, and I don't remember what George had, but it was something funny because I was like, what on earth? And immediately Greg runs into a trash can and causes like noise for the whole neighborhood to hear. So they're not being discreet, and everybody's like, Greg! And I was like, this is just so funny, they're cracking me up. And then it wouldn't be a Port Wynn event, something happening in Port Wynn without them finding something. So they're having, as they're doing their neighborhood watch, they come across the elderly guy that was in the doctor's office. Ronnie was his name, the one that needs to take his insulin or whatever. They see that I think it's either his house, and the woman named Josephine had her car parked in his driveway, or vice versa. But regardless, they find out that Ronnie and Josephine are having like a little make-out session. It seems like that they want to be more than friends kind of situation, and it wouldn't be a small-town gossip without Aunt Sarah. I knew there was more to it than her making all them casseroles. Like, apparently she's been making a lot of casseroles lately. And yeah, it just makes sense. Apparently Ronnie's wife had recently passed away and they were making a big to-do. Well, he didn't waste no time, did he? This is just so funny. That's just like small town talk right there. You had to have a little gossip. And then they continue to do their neighborhood watch. And while they're doing that, Elaine has decided to take things into her own hands because, it's Elaine. She has decided to start her investigation show called Claw and Order, where she is Detective Elaine Denton, and she is going to figure out who the killer is in Port Wynn. And she has Al as her cameraman, and I can tell that Al and her are beginning to really develop feelings since the kiss last week, because Al is really complimenting her, telling her that she looks good in the leather jacket, and he's just like they're flirting pretty much, and I think Elaine likes that. He's giving her compliments, and they're just really warming up to each other, and I'm hoping that their relationship continues to grow. So as they're doing their investigation show, and Dr. Best walks in, and Al's immediately like, we're just doing, and for once the doc's like, no, carry on, do what you're doing, I don't care. And immediately Elaine's like, okay, what's up with you? Because he's never like that. He's always like telling people to get out, and if she's not doing her job, he gets upset with her, and he just didn't care that she was doing her podcast thing today. And she's like, what is wrong with you? And he's like, what do you mean what's wrong? Why wouldn't I be in a good mood? I finally have a patient that won't talk back to me. And I was like, he is just enjoying being the person to do the autopsy. He's really enjoying himself. And then the fact that he looks at the board and says, did you do that? And she's like, yeah, it's pretty clever, isn't it? And he's like, if only you could do your job this good. And I was like, that's just so funny. And I was like, yep, back to Dr. Best, back to his normal self. He's still annoyed with her for not doing her job, but he's just more calm and collected. And I really think that he's enjoying being able to perform a surgery, so to speak, but it just doesn't have to do with blood. He's back to what he loves to do. So while he is doing that, we go back to the neighborhood watch, and they see that Sheriff Mark is questioning Geneva. And right away, Aunt Sarah's like, what's going on with Geneva? And she immediately goes to Geneva's house. So it turns out that Sheriff Mark believes that the Bog Man may be Geneva's lost husband, Bruce. And immediately Geneva's like, really? You think that's my Brucey? And she immediately begins to get questioned by Sheriff Mark. And as she's getting questioning, Aunt Sarah is like, what are you doing talking to Geneva? What is going on with Geneva? And Sheriff Mark's like, well, we believe that the man in the bog is Bruce. And immediately Aunt Sarah becomes concerned because Geneva's her friend, and she's like, do you really think that that could be Bruce? And right away, when Geneva confesses that she did it, she killed him, and she threw him into the bog to arrest her, I didn't buy it one bit, because I could tell that there was like a little bit more panic in her face than, oh no, they uncovered my long lost murder I did. I could tell that something else happened with her husband, and to cover it up because she doesn't want to tell, because this is a gossip town that everybody knows everything, she didn't want to tell the truth, so she just said that so that she could get arrested. I didn't think she could do it. But then I was like, well, I could be wrong, but I didn't buy it one bit. So while we have all of that going on, we see Dr. Best in his doctor's office. He's really into this autopsy stuff now. He's watching autopsy, how to do videos, and he's just like really doing his research because he wants to do a good job of doing this autopsy. You know, he's very thorough and he's just enjoying himself. And that's when he finds out that Louisa is there for her appointment. And immediately you could tell he is panicked, because the first thing he says is, where's Elaine? Is she not coming? And Louisa's like, oh, well, she had to stop at the Salty Breeze to get a cheese Danish. She'll be in shortly. And his remark, I wouldn't want work to get in the way of her breakfast treats. Like, he was in a panic. He uses Elaine, or Elaine helps him by doing the blood draws. And I just was like, how are you going to adapt to this? How are you going to do this? So, he immediately becomes panicked, and he's kind of acting flustered and awkward, and, Louisa is like, is everything okay? Because the first thing she says when she walks in is, I'm nervous, and he goes, I'm nervous too, and she's like, that's not something you want your doctor to say to you when you're walking in getting ready to have a procedure done, or whatever it may be. And he's like, no, I'm not nervous about that, I'm nervous about, he's trying to, think of, he was nervous about the autopsy. He was at that point, he was trying to cover his tracks because he said the wrong thing again. And then he is stalling. He doesn't want to do the blood draw. He's hoping Elaine will come in. She doesn't come in. He ends up getting the needle, and he's getting ready to draw the blood. And he begins to get flustered and nauseous because he's thinking about the blood getting ready to come out. And she's like, is everything okay? He's like, well, your veins. They're not, I'm having trouble with your veins. And then she immediately like, well, Dr. Reese, loved my veins. He never had a problem. And immediately, Dr. Best, Martin being Barton, he knocks over the cart thing that has the medical supplies, and immediately says, we're gonna have to reschedule, you're gonna have to come back at another time. And then she says what she says about Dr. Reese, and he's like, well, Dr. Reese is gonna have to come back from the dead then to draw your blood. And then she's immediately like, no, that's not what I meant, but he's like, I'm done, I'm out, because he had almost saw blood, and he just runs out, so to speak. And she's all confused. She's like, what, is everything okay? Why did he just do that? So, after we see that going on, we have that going on at the doctor's office, we have a side hustle going on at the Salty Breeze. We have old Bert secretly letting people in to see the dead body, to see the bog man, / we have him making a little bit of extra cash, and he was charging the teenagers extra to get pictures with the bog man, which is hilarious. I'm not surprised, because if you remember in the episode of the Blueberry Festival, Bert is the guy that if he can make a little bit of extra cash, or if he can get things done for free by people doing it for him, he's all for it. For the Blueberry Festival, because he was the judge, he was getting a free oil change, he was getting his lawn cut. He was just taking advantage of the kind people, and he's doing the same thing. Hey, if I can make a little cash for them to take pictures with the bog man, hey, I'll do it. So while he has his little side hustle going on, and so far nobody has caught him. We have Dr. Best and Mark questioning Geneva at the jail. So immediately, Sheriff Mark wants to know why Geneva did it, and he's asking her all these questions, and she's just knitting like it's nothing. And she immediately stops him and says, I'm not going to be able to finish this knitting my knitting if you keep asking me questions. I done told you that I used my husband's hunting rifle. I shot him, and I picked him up and threw him in the bog. And immediately, Dr. Best was not buying it whatsoever, because he says, you really tossed a 200-pound man into a bog? And she says, I used my core. And I was like, that's so funny. It's like, oh, he's not buying it whatsoever. And she's like, I used my core. Like, she's like, I used my core. You don't think I can pick him up? So I can. I used my core. And then, Sheriff Mark, is there any other secrets or things you're hiding that you haven't told me? And then she brings up his goldfish. And I died laughing at this, too. This whole scene, I was laughing at. So she says, Mark, your goldfish didn't run away. He ended up dying. And then Mark, you mean my goldfish didn't go to be in a rock band? And then Dr. Best's reaction, it's better not to know, Mark. It's better not to know. Mark, I thought he was part of the band, and it was a clever name, but I can't remember. If I can look it up, I'll put it as a subtitle. What the band name the goldfish was in, and he's, I gotta go. I can't process this. So he walks out, and Dr. Best, and it's just Dr. Best and Geneva and Geneva. I don't know how he got into law enforcement, and Dr. Best, me neither. I thought that was so funny. Like, Dr. Best isn't the only one that thinks that it's odd for Mark to be in law enforcement. It's just so funny, that whole interaction. So then Dr. Best is like, well, can you tell me anything about Bruce? Does he have tattoos? Has he had any medical procedures done? And then the way she nonchalantly says, this is what Geneva says, well, he has no spleen, he has no gallbladder, and he got his appendix removed. All the organs that you don't necessarily need, he doesn't have. And then Dr. Best, well, that's a start. It's like, that's just so funny. She practically helped him out, because if this guy has any of these organs, then it's not him. So I just thought that whole entire scene between the three was just hilarious. I just liked that scene. It just was making me laugh, everything that was being said. So we go back to the Salty Breeze. Everybody it's Elaine, Greg, George, and Aunt Sarah just sitting and just casually talking. Everybody is in shock that Geneva is the bog man killer. Everybody is thinking that immediately because she confessed. And, everybody's like, you just don't know the people that's around you. And then Greg and George has this thing going on because, George makes the comment, yeah, you just don't know about the people that's around you. And apparently Greg did something back in New York that made George upset. And so they're doing their little banter between one another. Meanwhile, Elaine is, excited about the news of the development. And she's like, I gotta go film this. So she's ready to continue her detective show. And then Aunt Sarah is in just disbelief because her friend may have committed murder. And she just doesn't know how to react. And while all this is going on, it's just, this scene was funny to me too. Every little scene, I like the details of the things that are being said. Because as Elaine's leaving, she loved her cream cheese Danish. And she tells George that that's the best one yet. And she wants to know what's in it. And George and Greg said, I couldn't tell you, because if I did, I would have to kill you. And Aunt Sarah's like, no. And they're like, yeah, probably can't use that saying anymore. So, that was just the little things, the dialogue, I enjoy very much, because I was like, that's just funny right there. Because, that's just a casual saying, but now that tensions are high in this town, yeah, you gotta watch what you say. While we have that going on, we have Elaine filming her detective show again, and Al is still her cameraman, and all is going well. And then Peter, Kronk, and Copernicus walk in. So it hasn't been said or shown, but it looks like that maybe Dr. Best has taken Peter Kronk up on that offer of walking the dog, because he comes in with the dog on the leash, with Copernicus on the leash. So I'm curious about that. But it would make sense, because it seems like Dr. Martin's relationship with Peter is growing, because they relate to one another. So I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't tell him he could walk Copernicus. So Peter walks in, And, Elaine's like, the case is solved, Geneva did it, case closed. And immediately Peter's like, how do you know? And she's like, well, does it really matter? How do I know? It just is, and the case is closed. And then Peter, well, you're not a really good detective. And immediately Al kind of defends her, and he's like, hey, don't say that to my girlfriend. And when he did that, he accidentally made Elaine upset without knowing he made Elaine upset, because Elaine's like, girlfriend? I'm not your girlfriend. And they kind of have a little bit of a disagreement, and Al storms out and has told her to get a new cameraman, that if he's not her girlfriend, or if she's not his girlfriend, then he doesn't know pretty much what her deal is, and he just storms out. So what I was afraid of, you had the Louisa and Martin awkward situation. Now you have Elaine and Al situation, trying to work these things out for their relationship. So, we see that Bert is still making his side hustle of giving a private tour to people to see the Bog Man. And it doesn't go to plan this time, because Greg and George catches him. And immediately, Greg and George are very upset. They're like, how dare you take advantage of a tragedy? And they're just letting him have it and telling him he just needs to go on. Can't believe him. That's just selfish. I can't believe you. And then Greg, doesn't surprise me whatsoever, Greg immediately comes back to Bert and says, can you cut me in if I take care of George? So now it looks like Bert and Greg are accomplices of their little side hustle without trying to not let George in on it. Because, George would shut it down immediately. So we have that going on. Doesn't surprise me whatsoever. I mean, Greg is just like Bert, trying to do anything to get business booming for the Salty Breeze, to pay those bills and everything. I mean, last week he told the press that this Jeremy Ryder guy was coming, and if it wasn't for Sally Milo, the pharmacist, knowing this Jeremy guy, he wouldn't have showed up, and Greg would have been in deep water, because he made a mistake misleading people, but he clearly doesn't learn. So while all that is going on, he immediately, you see Sheriff Mark and Dr. Bess Martin coming, and immediately Greg is like, Sheriff! And he tells everybody to scram, because they don't want to get in trouble for their illegal operation of showing the body to every person that pays. So they go back to doing the autopsy. And the Sheriff Mark is like confused, and all he's thinking about is, what else is Geneva hiding? First Bruce, now my beloved goldfish. And then the fact that Dr. Bess asks this question, he's like, Mark, what made you think that your fish joined a rock band? And he said, well, I don't know, I had a dog read my mind once. And I was like, this is just too funny. And then they immediately go back to seriousness, and Sheriff Mark wants to know what Dr. Best is looking for. And he says that, he looked at Bruce's medical files, and that he had a procedure done where his gallbladder was removed. So if he sees that there's a gallbladder, that will determine whether or not it is Bruce. So as he is checking to see if the Bog Man has a gallbladder, he immediately discovers that yes, he does. So that immediately means that this is not Bruce. Geneva's off the hook. This is not her husband. She didn't murder her husband. So while all that is going on, he also finds a key component to this murder mystery to make it get even more interesting. He pulls out this it looked like a golf ball or marble, and even Sheriff Mark's like, what's a marble doing in him? And it turns out that they have uncovered a historian of Port Wynne, that is actually a musket ball that had been he had been shot with. So that means that this body is older than they think. So immediately everybody is getting excited, because they discovered that Martin has discovered, Dr. Best has discovered, that there is a musket ball, that he has been killed with a musket ball, meaning that they want to dig deeper into the history. So while everybody's excited about that, you have Aunt Sarah in the jail with Geneva just questioning her. Why did you do it, Geneva? Why would you kill your husband, and what are you hiding? And then, the way Geneva was acting, Aunt Sarah was not buying it whatsoever. And she's like, you need to tell me the truth. And then it turns out that all this time, that wasn't Bruce. Geneva knew it wasn't Bruce. She just made up the story that she killed her husband because she didn't want to tell the truth because of the town. Turns out that Geneva's husband, that Thanksgiving, left with her sister. And she hasn't seen neither one of them since. Sad situation. I just felt so bad for Geneva. I was like, yeah, I could see why you wouldn't want to share that, because the town, all they do is gossip. Geneva was just really upset. She's like, yeah, and it's just so embarrassing that I would have to share that because I was left alone on Thanksgiving with a cold turkey. And she's like really getting deep. She's like, yeah, I don't want to admit that I'm alone. I have no one. And then, immediately Aunt Sarah, being Aunt Sarah, starts comforting her and is like, you have the town. We're your family. Which I thought that was just that's a wholesome Aunt Sarah moment. That's just how Aunt Sarah is. It's all about community. It's all about showing love and support for your fellow Portwinians. I can tell that is what it's all about in Portwin. So we found out the truth, which we kind of already knew, that Geneva didn't do it. But the question is, who is the Bog Man? So they're geeking over it. George is excited. He's like, good job, Martin, you found this. This is a huge discovery. And Dr. Best, Martin, is ready to just shut the case. He's like, okay, we figured it out. Geneva didn't do it. Okay, it's a body from a different time era. We're done with the case. Case closed. And Sheriff Martin's like, no, case is not closed. There's still been a murder, and we gotta figure out what's going on. And plus, George was like, yeah, and it's history. It's about our town. I want to know who done it. I want to know who this guy is. And immediately, Dr. Best, being Dr. Best, has become annoyed again, and he's like, well, you can do whatever, just leave me out of it. But he says that, but as he says that, on the side, he's making a phone call to Harvard, to colleagues in Harvard, to do a favor about sending samples to them. So I think he still wants to know who this person is too. He just isn't letting on. So all that's going on, and I cracked up by what he says. So Aunt Sarah storms in. Everybody wants to know what's going on. Greg comes in. Bert's coming in. They want to know what all the excitement's about. And George explains that that it's been discovered that there was a musket ball, and immediately Bert and Greg get concerned because apparently they've been making t-shirts that says "Murder in the Bog," making profits off of selling t-shirts. And now that this whole thing has been unveiled that Geneva didn't do it, they start to panic, and then Greg's like, you know what, it's okay. A murder's a murder. So they're off the hook. And then George is catching on that something's going on between the two of them, but they're like, nothing's going on, we're just doing repairs. And they walk out. And Aunt Sarah comes in because she's excited that Geneva didn't do it. And then Martin goes, this is what cracks me up. When she's like, Geneva didn't do it, Geneva. Sorry, Jessica Fletcher, that's old news. I just thought that was so funny. It's like, Aunt Sarah's like, what? You already know, how do you know? And then, they tell. So while he's on the phone making the call, you have all of them going excited about wanting to know who did the murder. And so we see that they finally got the town together in the Salty Breeze to explain that this Bog Man is from another time era, that it wasn't Geneva that did it, so it could be an older body. And nobody wants to listen, so Martin immediately says, who wants to make $1,000? And that immediately he gets everyone's attention because, if it has money involved, anyone's going to want to do it. He's like, doesn't surprise me. And this whole scene cracked me up too. He's trying to explain that researchers want to figure out who the relative could be to this Bog Man, and Aunt Sarah keeps interrupting. He's like, cut to the chase, get on with it, how do we make money? And he finally says that they just need to give a DNA sample, and if they are a match, they could get $1,000 for each person that is a match to potentially being this person's relative. Immediately everybody's hooked, they want to do it, but surprisingly Bert does not want to do it. And, he tells Al that everything's a money gimmick. Don't fall for it. They don't need to know. Because he was just making excuses. He's like, if you give your DNA, next thing you know, it'll be in the system and you'll be called to be in a police lineup. And, Al seems like he wants to do it. He's like, well, Dad, it hasn't stopped you from doing anything with money before. And Bert's like, and as this is going on, Aunt Sarah comes up to Bert and says, meet you out back to see the bog man. And so Al was like, yeah, see, you are doing something for money. But so something's going on there, where Bert doesn't want Al to give his DNA sample. And I'm like, okay, what's going on there? Why is Bert so adamant about not doing that? So while that's going on, we see that Peter Kronk has taken an interest in Elaine. He wants to be her cameraman, which immediately Elaine's like, well, let's talk about it. So it looks like Peter is now going to be Elaine's new cameraman, and as they are doing the DNA samples in the doctor's office, Elaine being Elaine, still doing her detective show, and she told Gilbert she hopes that she doesn't have to subpoena him, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about, but you're making me nervous, which I just thought that was funny. She's taking this detective thing seriously, and that's when Al walks in, and tensions are still pulling between the two of them. They're both upset with one another. Al's upset with Elaine for basically telling him she's not his girlfriend in the way that she done it, and he just doesn't want to talk to her, and he's like, oh, I see you found a new cameraman already. And Peter is like filming everything, and he gets in trouble because it's like, can it Kronk, meaning, hey, stay out of this. And Al was finally like, okay, I'm doing this, but don't tell my dad. My dad's being weird about me getting this DNA test, so please just don't say anything. So Elaine doesn't know what that's all about, but she's like, okay, fine. And then they're just still having conflict with the whole boyfriend-girlfriend thing. So we finally see that everybody has given their DNA tests, and it's the next day, and Louisa is back in for a second time trying to get her blood drawn. And this time Elaine's in the doctor's office with them, getting ready to assist. So it's like, okay, maybe this will go a little bit better than it did at the beginning. And no, it doesn't go well at all. He basically at this point is making it obvious something's wrong, because she's like, Louisa's like, I've very hydrated and made sure to make it easy so that you can see my veins. And he's getting ready to do the blood draw, and immediately he storms out of the office so she can do it, and immediately Louisa's like, is everything okay? And Elaine's like, oh, that's normal protocol, that's how we do it. It's a quick exchange, a quick let me take over kind of situation. We always do it like this. And immediately I can tell that Louisa knows that there's something wrong, and I think she's beginning to think that it's her. So she immediately goes to him and she's like, okay, did I do something to offend you? Why are you avoiding me? And he immediately is like, I'm not avoiding you being Dr. Best. He's like, I'm not avoiding you, what are you talking about? I just have things to do. I gotta get these samples at the bog. And she's like, well, it feels like you've really been avoiding me lately. And then he, Dr. Best being Dr. Best, upset, but at the same time saying things that he will regret saying in the future. He talks about how why does he need to be why would he not be okay that he's tired of at least dead bodies don't talk back and need sympathy, and he's tired of people not listening to his advice. Why does he even bother giving advice? He's tired of people having feelings, and he's hurting feelings, and he just lets her have it. And then she kind of just breaks, and she's like, I knew it, I knew you wasn't fit to be the doctor in Portland. And she storms out, and immediately Elaine's like, what is your deal? What did you say to her? And he's like, I don't want to talk about it, I need to be alone. And he walks out and he goes to the bog. So he's taking samples at the bog, and you can tell he's really upset. I think the fact that he's still having this blood phobia issue is really driving him insane. because his mood changes immediately after he encounters Louisa and the whole blood issue exchange happens, and he just becomes a different person. He just looks upset, sad. I think it really is bothering him. So he is doing the samples at the bog, and next thing you know, he just falls and he lands in the bog, and he's just laying in the water, and I'm thinking, is he okay? Like, there's nobody around. He's just laying in the water. Is everything okay? And finally he gets up, and then this next scene, I'm like, I knew it. He has a heart this side of him. So we see him walking into the doctor's office soaking wet. He's still upset. He's still down. And he goes and he just slides at the end of the stairs and just falls to the floor. And he's just sitting there petting Copernicus the dog. I'm like, see, him and that dog have a connection. He just doesn't want to admit it. Like, I mean, we've all been there. And if you have a pet, you know that your pets can comfort you. And I just thought that was a heart-touching moment. That dog is like an emotional support animal for him. It is there for him. He just needs to, like, admit it. He needs to show more love and compassion towards Copernicus. So I just loved that scene. Meanwhile, at the Salty Breeze, Greg and Bert are not letting this whole Bogman mystery thing stop them. As it develops more and more, things are cranking up where more and more people are wanting to get pictures and see the Bogman. So they are still giving their secret little tours for people to do that. And this time it doesn't go as smooth because George ends up catching them. And immediately, George is very upset with Greg, starts fussing at him. He's like, I can't believe you're doing this behind my back. You should be ashamed of yourself. And, Greg doesn't have no shame whatsoever. He's like, well, you're gonna feel a whole lot different when you find out the power bill has been paid and I've been able to buy name brand ingredients for the kitchen. And, George is just not having it. He's like, this is dirty money. I cannot support this. And then finally in the end, Greg convinces George to let them continue. Which I was like, come on, George, you're better than this. Don't allow this to continue happening. What are you doing? But, George gives in, and Greg and Bert continue their little side hustle. Meanwhile, George, I can see a side of George, he is into this history because him and Sheriff Mark are digging into the history book archives, and they're determined to figure out who this Bogman may be. And Greg gets kind of upset and jealous at George for doing this because, they're doing this whole thing, and Greg is like, okay, I'm glad you're having a good time, but it's 5 minutes till opening. And George is like, okay, well, you can go ahead without me. I'll be there shortly. And Greg is like, ugh. He's like upset with George for like being so into the history, and he even makes the comment, that's the last time I'll ever let him watch the History Channel. And I'm like, you're the one to talk. You're over here doing behind George's back business deals with Bert, taking advantage of this Bogman and making a profit for letting people see the Bogman. You're not supposed to be doing this. So you're upset with George for doing a little history digging, innocent history digging, trying to figure out who this may be. And I'm like, you're a fine one to talk there, Greg. So I was like I'm like, oh, who's jealous? It's no different than how you were acting, doing your own thing. I just thought that was so funny. I just find that George and Greg's characters and their relationship just crack me up. The way they act, it's just so funny. I love that it's developing throughout this season. We get to see more and more of the characters' development. So, it turns out that, Al's DNA test comes back, and there is a concern that Dr. Best wants him to come into the office. And he asks Elaine to have Al come in, and Elaine's like, do I have to? And Dr. Best was like, gee, I don't know. What do you think, detective? And I was like, this thing between you and Al is just going to have to stop. It's still your job to do what the doc asks you to do, whether you're having a conflict of interest or not with him right now. You still got to do what he asks. So Dr. Best and Al are having their conversation in the examination room, and he's telling him that he's glad he came in for a DNA test, that there was a genetic marker that is higher, something they need to be on the lookout for every time he's in the doctor's office. And, immediately Al's like, well, is everything okay? And, Dr. Best is just like calm and collected, and he's like, no, everything's fine. It's a genetic thing that you get. It just means that you're more double jointed, and you wear corrective lenses, so it has to do with your eyesight, and you're healthy overall, so you're fine. It's just something that we need to watch for every time you're in for a physical. And immediately Al is concerned because he finds out it's genetic, and he asks the doc, okay, if it's genetic, is it on my mom's side or my dad's side? And immediately, Al's, this moment, I could feel it, and I'm like, oh, I feel so bad for Al. Like, to find out like this, it just, I don't know how I would react. So, the doc's like, well, in this case, it would be your father's side. And, Al's, like, asking questions because his father is heavier built than heavier set than him. He has perfect vision, so this doesn't sound like it would be coming from him because of what the doc has previously said. And then he immediately asks Dr. Best, so are you saying that that Bert is not my father? Immediately Dr. Best is like, well, and I kudos to the doc for actually in this moment not saying something dumb. He actually gave good advice. He was like, Al, it's not, family doesn't always have to be, he was like trying to comfort him, and then Elaine has to storm in, and immediately Elaine storms in, and she's like, the Bogman results are back. And I was like, are you kidding me? I was a little mad at Elaine for that. I was like, are you kidding me? The doc's in there with a patient. What are you doing storming in? Knock before going in. And immediately, Al gets upset. He storms out. Elaine doesn't know what's going on. She wants to know, and Martin, Dr. Best, is like, well, you need to go talk to Al. You just need to go ask him. Like, I can't say nothing. My hands are tied. So he starts storming out. Al starts storming out, and Elaine wants to talk to him. And, Al's just like, leave it, Elaine. Leave it. Like, he's just upset. He's trying to process this everything going on, and he's just not wanting to have anything to do with Elaine right now. So, I was like, I'm curious about that too. I'm like, uh-oh, is Bert not Al's father? Like, what's going on there? And, I was like, man, that's just information that I don't know how I would process if I did the same thing Al did. So, we finally go back to the Salty Breeze, and we're getting ready to find out who the relative is to the Bogman. And we see that Dr. Best, Martin, and Louisa have a little exchange with one another. Louisa's like, Martin, they're still mad at one another, and immediately Aunt Sarah catches on. And Aunt Sarah's like, what's that all about? And, Dr. Best being Dr. Best, Martin's like, it's patient-doctor confidentiality, I could not tell you. And Aunt Sarah, you just really like being a pain and getting on everybody's nerves, don't you? Or I can't remember how she exactly said it, but I was like, and he's just like shaking his head like, what did I do? So the moment we've all been waiting for, we are finally finding out who the Bogman's relative could be. So everybody is anxious, they're wanting to know, they do a little drum roll, and the results are in. The relative to the Bogman is Dr. Martin Best himself. I did not see that one coming in a million years. I was just like in shock, as I think the town was. I was like, really? And Dr. Best is like in shock. He's in disbelief. He's like, wait a second, I didn't submit any DNA sample, and Elaine ends up being Elaine. She ended up taking hair from his hairbrush and sent it in for DNA analysis. And, immediately he's like, you can't do that. That's a violation of privacy and illegal. And Aunt Sarah's like, now calm down, Martin, calm down. And Louisa's in shock, the whole town. Aunt Sarah's like, looks like this town's in your blood after all. And he's just in disbelief. I think he's like, I can't believe this. And then they start reading details, and we find out that the victim is James Brewster. So his relative was James Brewster. and he had an argument with this other guy, and I can't remember the name of the other guy, but he ended up getting killed. And they were reading about James Brewster, and it turns out that James Brewster was a guy that kept to himself, that lived in a shack at the bog, didn't really want to be in social interaction with people. And everybody's like, hey, that sounds like Martin. And immediately, he's just devastated, and he's back to his old self, sad and down. And Louisa's like, no, Martin, wait. And he just storms out, and it shows him going in the freezer looking at the bog man, and that's when Elaine concludes her Claw and Order by saying, the Bog Father. We've now found out who the Bog Father is, which we now know the mystery of who this person is, and I did not see that coming whatsoever, like I said. And then you see just everybody's coming up to Dr. Bess Martin now and kind of like heckling him. They're like calling him the Bog Man and saying how they're not surprised. The teenagers were even like, he's like the saddest man ever, and it's just even more sad now. It all makes sense. And I'm like, I just felt bad for him. I'm like, they just give him a hard time. I just feel so bad for him. And then he goes into his room and he's just like sitting there by himself. And then finally he goes and he's knocking on the door, and I'm thinking, okay, is it Aunt Sarah's house or Louisa's house? And I was like, Louisa. So it turns out he ends up going to Louisa's house, and he is going to he came to apologize, and it was Martin being Martin. He goes, knocks on the door, he starts walking away. Then she comes and she's like, Martin, are you okay? And he's like, I came to apologize. Okay, have a good night. And he's going to walk away. And, Louisa's not going to let him leave that easily. And she's like, wait, you call that an apology? And he's like, well, and she's like, come here, what's going on? What's gotten into you? And he finally tells her, and I'm like, he's talking to her. And he's like, well, I have an issue. And she's like, okay. And I'm like, tell her you have a blood phobia. Tell her you have the blood phobia. I just kept saying it. Tell her you have the blood phobia. He's like, I have an issue. I can't deal with blood. And, immediately she's in shock. And she's like, oh, how long has this been going on? And he, tells her since the beginning and explains to her that's why he's not a surgeon no more. He ended up getting this blood phobia, and he moved to Port Wynn because he's trying to be a doctor, practice medicine without having to deal with blood, and that is harder than it looks because he's having to deal with blood day to day. That's why Elaine helps him, and that he just finds it a struggle. And she finally is like, well, why are you just now telling me this? What makes you want to tell me this now? And I was like, okay, he's going to say it. Tell her how much you love her. Come on. Explain. Tell her you have feelings. And he goes, well, I don't want to be like the Bog Man. And, immediately, she kind of has that look on her face. And I think she understands what he's saying. But, of course, then Copernicus the dog walks up. And immediately she goes, oh, I see you've got a dog. And he's like, it's not my dog. And she's like, well, it seems like it's your dog. It loves you. And he immediately walks off, and that's the end of episode 8. And I'm like, we came this close again to seeing him say he has feelings for her. But he doesn't say it, and at least he now tells her that he has a blood phobia, which is a start to maybe their relationship can grow now. And, I was really happy that he told her that he has a blood phobia. I was hoping he would tell her in episode 2, but that didn't go. And now I'm like, I don't think Louisa would be the person to tell the town that he has a blood phobia, spread the gossip. I don't think she'd be like that. But I'm curious to see, now that she knows and Elaine knows, who else will he tell, or will the word get out? That is what my question is. Let's talk about my thoughts about this episode and what I liked and all that good stuff. So, like I said at the beginning of this video, episode 8 of season 1 has been my favorite episode by far. Just because of the murder mystery aspect of it, and it just overall was a fun episode. It was, I don't know how I would categorize this one. It did have some comedy in it. I guess it would still be your standard comedy dramedy. But there was a lot of detective work in this episode that I really enjoyed. I've enjoyed seeing every single character in this episode. I feel like each and every week we're learning more and more about each and every character. I loved that we got to see relationships grow. We got to see more of Dr. Best and Louisa. I didn't know how they would recover after last week's awkwardness. Even though we didn't see them exactly there all the time, like, it wasn't the big development like last week's episode, we still got to see that, seems like they're still trying to figure things out. I loved seeing the development of Al and Elaine's relationship, despite, they had a little hiccup because Elaine didn't feel like she was his girlfriend. In the end, they make up, and she's like, yeah, you can call me your girlfriend. And I do want to say I didn't mention the fact that I'm curious about the whole Al and Bert situation, because at the end of the episode, Elaine confronts Al and is like, what is going on? Are you dying? And he's like, no, I'm not dying. And she's like, well, if you're dying, then I'm dying, and I'm too pretty and young to die. I just couldn't stand the thought of something being wrong with you. They kind of make up, and she apologizes for telling him that she's not his girlfriend, and they end up making up at the end, and he doesn't tell her that the whole thing about what Martin told him. He kind of leaves the part out about Bert might not be his dad, so he doesn't quite trust her yet, but he does tell her that he is double jointed, which in the end he didn't really tell her the truth, like the true thing. But it's kind of like the whole Louisa and Martin thing in episode 2. Martin didn't come out and tell Louisa, hey, I have a blood phobia, and he told her about his sister not passing away, but he doesn't tell her the whole story. So I think, like, the same situation with Martin and Louisa, I think eventually Al and Elaine, as their relationship develops, Al will start telling Elaine more. That's what I think. So I did love that we got to see more of Al and Elaine's relationship, and they recover from it, hopefully. Curious to find out the whole Bert and Al thing about, is Bert really Al's father? I loved seeing the George and Greg characters once again. They just cracked me up. And Aunt Sarah, being Aunt Sarah, just loved seeing the comfort for her friend Geneva through the difficult time. Sheriff Mark's character always cracks me up. At the beginning of the season, I was saying he kind of got on my nerves, but now I'm learning to kind of put up with his character, and I'm kind of understanding his character more and more. He's just a goofy, quirky, weird sheriff, pretty much. And at this point, you just gotta take it or leave it. But I think overall his character's getting better. And yeah, I just thoroughly enjoyed this episode, and I just can't wait to see what's in store next. I'm very excited about next week's episode. I can finally talk about it. I've kind of hinted here and there, but as a Doc Martin viewer, there's a certain character that is getting ready to be on next week's episode, and I've kind of been trying not to talk about it with my Best Medicine folks because I didn't want to give any spoilers, but now that we've seen a preview, I think I can give it away. So I don't know if you realize, but next week's episode, Martin's father, Dr. Best's father, is coming to town, or his parents are coming to town, and it shows a little clip of his father. Turns out, we learned in the Blackout episode 5, that Martin's father was a doctor like himself, but they didn't really have a relationship. In episode 1, we have a reference that Aunt Sarah says that because of his father, some conflict happened where they wasn't as close as they used to be. And then we learn about the Rosemary, his sister. They were in a car accident and she dies at the age of 8. So a lot of things have been brought up about his parents, but next week's episode we get to meet his parents. And the actor that plays Dr. Robert Best, his father, happens to be the actor who played Dr. Martin Elliam in Doc Martin, the original, Martin Clunes. And I'm just super excited. This is a big deal for us Doc Martin fans because we have not seen Martin clunes on the on our screens since Doc Martin has wrapped up. I mean, he's been in other projects, but I mean, since Doc Martin has wrapped up, we haven't got to see our beloved Grumpy Doctor. So I'm very excited to see him act next week, and I'm very excited to react to that episode with you guys. But so far, episode 8 has been my favorite episode so far. And yeah, I think that concludes our little reaction video for this week. If you liked this video, please be sure to leave a comment, thumbs up, like, and turn that notification bell on if you would like to get notified every time I upload. I try to upload these series every week. I try to upload every episode on a Thursday, or here lately it's been Thursday or Friday. So please check out my playlist if you haven't already. And if you want to see more of these reaction videos, I'll be back here next week reacting to episode 9. I'm so sad we only have 5 episodes left. Now, there's 13 episodes and it's just going by so fast, but every week I enjoy making these videos for you guys. So yeah, that's where I say goodbye to my Best Medicine peeps for now. If you're a Doc Martin fan like myself and you're curious to see my thoughts of how this episode of Best Medicine ties in with Doc Martin, come on, let's talk about it. But if you're a Best Medicine fan and have not seen Doc Martin yet, this is where we say goodbye. So take care, and I will see you next week. So if you made it to this part of the video, that means you must be a Doc Martin fan like myself. So welcome. Let's talk all things Best Medicine in a Doc Martin fan's perspective. So I gotta say, I said at the beginning of this video, if you didn't watch the first part of this video, I told my fellow Best Medicine fans that this episode by far is my favorite episode. Just because I'm a murder mystery guru, and the fact that we had that going on in this episode just really pulled me in, and I was on the edge of my seat, so to speak, ready to figure out what's going on. Now, I didn't share this with my Best Medicine friends, but I'll share this with you guys because you've seen Doc Martin like myself. In every season, whatever you want to say, of Doc Martin, when watching, in every season or series, I would find that one episode that would just lure me in, become my favorite episode. And this week's episode of Best Medicine, being episode 8, really made me feel like the same way I felt in Series 7, Episode 8, the final episode of Series 7 of Doc Martin. It's the episode where he has been kidnapped by that crazy woman, the wife. Her husband's dying, and she doesn't want to believe that he's dying, and she just kidnaps Martin and tells him that he's not leaving until he's not leaving until he finds a cure for her husband, pretty much. And it was a whole thing. Louisa didn't believe that he would stand her up like that they had planned to have a dinner, and that something was seriously wrong. He wouldn't do that, and it ends up she brings a search party for Martin, and they end up figuring out that he's being held captive by this woman and her son because their father/husband is dying. And I was on the edge of my seat that whole entire episode, and I was just thinking, please don't be a cliffhanger, please don't be a cliffhanger, please don't be a cliffhanger. Because at that point, I didn't have the DVD set, and, it's hard to find season 7 through 10 without a paid subscription. So I had to go to the local library, long story short, and rent the DVD sets 8 through 10 to finish the series before I got the DVD set myself for my birthday. And, so yeah, that episode, being on the edge of my seat, just reminded me of this week's episode of Best Medicine. I just felt the same way. I'm like, okay, what's going to happen? I'm lured in now. Let's figure it out. So yeah, I just want to throw that in there. So let's talk about comparisons between Doc Martin and Best Medicine. Overall, this episode, really, that I can wrap my head around, doesn't really remind me of anything happening in Doc Martin. I don't ever remember there being a murder victim body found and Doc Martin Elliam doing a autopsy or anything like that. But with that being said, there was a few little details here and there that if you're a Doc Martin fan, you would kind of catch on. And I took the time to write these down this week because I feel like I'm missing so many things in past episodes that I haven't really talked about, so I tried to do my best this week. First of all, the blood phobia issue. They are doing similar things in both shows. So in the original Doc Martin, we see that Dr. Eliam Martin is trying to succumb his blood phobia by doing these little practices. You see him in the shed trying to do cut the meat, and he just can't do it. You see him, he ends up going to therapy, and he listens to this recording that this therapist has made, trying to desensitize him. You know, just throughout the whole series of Doc Martin, we've seen Martin Eliam trying to do these simple things. And now we're seeing that with Dr. Best in Best Medicine. You know, we see him at the beginning of the show, he bought a piece of meat, and he's trying to cut into it, and he just can't do it. He gets all nauseous, and he runs into the cabinet door, and Copernicus the dog of everything ends up taking the piece of meat away, so he can't practice anymore. So that was one key thing that I caught on right away, is he is trying to succumb his blood phobia, trying to adapt with it, trying to make it not as hard to deal with blood like Martin Eliam did. I also felt like in this episode, both Berts had something in common. In Doc Martin, the original, Bert is always up to something. He's always doing something, trying to make that extra cash. I mean, we've seen him from being a plumber. You know, he bottled the water. He has a good heart. He was trying to, make money so that he could send Al to college, or I think it was college, whatever Al wanted to do. He wanted to be a computer technician or whatever. And just Bert just has a good heart. He's always trying to look out for Al. And we saw he had his restaurant. You know, he had the whiskey side business in the back of the van in later season or series when Al had the farm as an Airbnb. You know, he was hiding, making illegal whiskey, and just overall, Bert was just being Bert. In Best Medicine, Bert is similar in ways. You know, he takes advantage that there is a corpse in the freezer of the Salty Breeze, the Bog Man, and hey, people want to see it. I can make a few extra bucks here and there if I do this secretly. And then, Greg gets involved too. So, no surprise, just the Berts being Bert. I also found that the Al and Bert relationship situation was similar to the original. In Doc Martin, I don't remember the full details, but I remember Al asking Bert for his birth certificate. And Bert was very adamant about not knowing where that is, and why does he need to have that paperwork, that he's his father, and there was a whole big to-do about it, and we just never found out anything in the original that I can remember. I just remember Al just letting it go and loved his father. And then in the Best Medicine, this week's episode, we have Bert not wanting Al to go get the DNA test to see if they are relatives to the Bog Man. He tells him that it's a waste of time, that he knows that he's his father, and he knows that he's his son, so therefore there's no use in doing it. But Al ends up going secretly and does it, and finds out that he has a generic marker that has come from his father, and it turns out there's a red flag because it's not from Bert. So there's a growing, who is Bert not Al's father? What's going on there? So there was similarities there. I found similarities between the Al and Elaine characters in both. In Doc Martin, Elaine is very strict with Al. She doesn't let him call her his girlfriend. He has to call her at certain times as a schedule, and if he doesn't do it, he kind of gets she kind of brushes it off and goes off on him. That was a weird relationship in Doc Martin. I just never got that. In the background she's talking to her ex, and then she's not talking to her ex. It was a whole thing. Well, I saw similarities in Best Medicine in this week's episode because you have the part where when Peter Kronk is going at Elaine for calling her not a good detective because of the whole detective thing, case closed sort of thing, Al kind of says, hey, don't talk to my girlfriend like that. And when he says that, Elaine's like, girlfriend? What are you talking about? And they have like this whole argument about they're not boyfriend and girlfriend. And they're just serious friends, and then it just makes Al upset, and he storms off. But in the end, they make up, and Elaine's like, "Yeah, I'm your girlfriend." So similarities there. Also found similarities in the Martin and Louisa banter. One thing in particular is the fact when in Best Medicine you have Dr. Best storms out of the examination room doing the blood because he couldn't handle it, and he just let Elaine take care of it, and he just storms out. Louisa immediately confronts him and is like, hey, what's your deal? Did I do something to offend you? And he immediately just goes at her, and he's like, no, why would you say that? I have things to do. And then he immediately says things that he regrets, like, hey, I don't know what the big deal is. I don't know why I have to deal with people's feelings and emotions. And then she finally just has it with him and says, well, see, I knew you wasn't a fit for Port Wynn. I just knew it, and storms out. And that just reminds me of, in earlier series of Doc Martin, Louisa saying the same thing, how she knew that he wasn't fit for Port Wynn. She just knew it, and storms out, and they just have a little bicker in between each other. But in the end, in both, they end up making up in a way. But that just reminded me of that. And then I didn't have this written down, but another thing that reminds me of two things that were in common was the whole thing with Dr. Best talking to the town at the neighborhood meeting, and Dr. Martin Elliam talking to the town at both his aunt's funeral and at the field day at the school. So in Best Medicine, Dr. Best is asked to answer questions about the whole situation with this whole murder mystery. And he immediately is himself, and he says, do you want to stay alive? And they said, yeah. He's like, you need to do your therapy, you need to take your insulin, and all of you need fiber in your diet. And I just thought that was so funny. It just reminds me of the whole Dr. Martin Elliam encounter in the episode of the Aunt Joan's funeral. The whole time he's at Aunt Joan's funeral, he doesn't really say anything much about Aunt Joan. He's just talking about how heart disease, how to prevent it. And then at the field day, he talks about how he doesn't really even want to talk, but he's he needs to talk. She wants him to talk about exercise and everything, and he just doesn't go along with it. And it just reminded me of that with the whole Best Medicine scene. And then finally, the blood phobia thing. In Doc Martin, it's the final episode of Series 1. We see that everybody finds out that Martin has a blood phobia. It's broadcasted on the radio, which makes Martin upset, and he immediately thinks that is it Finn? I think it is what his name was. He thinks that he told it because he's the only one that knew. And turns out it was the Adrian Pitts guy. And in our version of Best Medicine, the only person that knows that Martin Best has a blood phobia is Elaine, because she finds out in that first episode, because she helps him in the bathroom. And he finally tells Louisa that he has a blood phobia, which I'm curious to see, will the whole town find out sooner or later. So yeah, that was the similarities. I think I covered them all. I tried to write down every single one, and I hope that I did cover them all. But yeah, I overall enjoyed this week's episode, and I can't wait for next week's episode because Martin Clunes will be starring in it as Robert Best, Martin's father. So I'm very excited, looking forward to seeing that episode next week. So yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed this video, and if you did, please leave a like, comment, and please subscribe and turn that notification bell on so you can see the next time I upload. And if you're curious to see more videos like this, I've made a playlist of the previous episodes, and I try to film one every week as the episodes are released. So yeah, I hope everybody has a great day, and I will see you guys next week with another reaction. Take care.